On my 30th birthday, my father showed up at my apartment for the first time in 3 years and handed me an envelope that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. He didn't say happy birthday. He didn't step inside. He just said, "Your grandmother left this for you." Then he added something I'll never forget. "She died believing you'd amount to nothing." Inside that envelope was a letter, a small brass key, and the beginning of a truth that had been buried for 5 years. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means you survived your parents. I knew you would." In that moment, everything I believed about my grandmother, my father, and the inheritance I was told I didn't deserve began to unravel. But to understand why that letter changed my life, you need to go back 5 years, to my grandmother, Eleanor Mercer's funeral. The funeral home smelled of lilies and polished wood. My grandmother lay in an expensive mahogany casket, surrounded by white flowers and soft music that faded into the background. My father, Richard Mercer, wasn't grieving. He was networking. He stood in the center of the room shaking hands, accepting condolences like business deals, his Rolex flashing under the chandelier lights. I stood off to the side, invisible. My stepmother, Victoria, moved gracefully through the crowd in designer black, proudly presenting my half-brother Derek, home from his Ivy League university. "Eleanor's beloved grandson," she kept saying. No one introduced me. I was 25, already teaching 3rd grade in a low-income public school. In my family, that made me the disappointment, the daughter who chose purpose over prestige. But what no one saw was that my grandmother once called me her little star. After my mother died of breast cancer when I was 12, Grandma Eleanor took me in for 2 years. Those were the safest, happiest years of my childhood. She made pancakes shaped like stars, read novels aloud in funny voices, and told me stories about my mother, stories my father avoided because grief made him uncomfortable. "Your mother was brave," she used to whisper when tucking me into bed. "And you are too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." When my father remarried and brought me back home at 14, everything changed. Victoria was polished and charming. A year later, Derek was born. From then on, I faded into the background. By the time I graduated with a degree in elementary education, my father barely pretended to care. He skipped my graduation for a client meeting. Derek, meanwhile, got a catered celebration when he got into university. My father toasted to the future of the Mercer name. I sat quietly in the back, already understanding my place. At every family gathering, he would ask, "Still teaching?" Then he'd laugh at my salary like it was a joke. He once told a business partner, loud enough for me to hear, that daughters don't understand ambition, that women think small. I stopped defending myself. I stayed quiet. And over time, I started to believe maybe my grandmother had been disappointed in me, too. 2 weeks after her funeral, we gathered at a law office for the reading of her will. Dark wood walls, leather chairs, my father at the head of the table. 90% of her estate went to him, to distribute at his discretion. To me, she left $10,000 for a reliable vehicle. That was it. My father smiled in a way that felt like victory. "Mother always knew what people deserved," he said. I walked out of that office believing the one person who had ever truly seen me had decided I wasn't worth more. 5 years passed. I kept teaching. I moved into a tiny studio apartment. I stopped attending most family events. No one seemed to notice. Then came my 30th birthday. I bought myself a small chocolate cake and lit a single candle. I was alone when the doorbell rang. My father stood there in an expensive coat, holding a yellowed envelope. "Found this in Mother's things," he said casually. "Probably sentimental nonsense." As he turned to leave, he paused and said, "She died believing you'd amount to nothing. She told me herself." Then he walked away. The envelope was sealed with my grandmother's old wax stamp. My name was written across the front in her handwriting. To be delivered on her 30th birthday. He had never opened it. I sat at my kitchen table, my birthday cake melting beside me, and broke the seal. Inside was a letter wrapped around a small brass key. "My dearest Faith," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you survived your parents. I knew you would. Not your father. Your parents. My hands trembled as I read the next line. I have never, not for a single day, believed you were anything less than extraordinary. If your father told you otherwise, he was lying. He lies about many things. A habit he'd inherited from his own father. I broke down reading that letter. For 5 years, I had carried the weight of believing my grandmother gave up on me. 5 years of shame. And now, in her own handwriting, she was telling me the truth. The key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank, Downtown Branch, Box 1247. You are the only authorized person, not your father, not his wife, not his son, only you. Inside, you'll find everything they tried to keep from you, your real inheritance, not the scraps Richard wanted you to have. I read that paragraph again and again. Your real inheritance. She explained why she hadn't left it with the family attorney. My father would have found it. She waited until I was old enough to know what to do. There was also a card for Margaret Holloway, an old friend who knew everything. Remember, my star, you are not what they made you believe. You never were. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years and drove downtown. The bank looked like it had been protecting secrets for a century. Marble floors, brass details, quiet voices. I handed over my ID and the key. When the clerk typed in the box number, her expression changed. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from the branch manager. He confirmed it. The box had been opened by my grandmother in 2019. I was the only authorized name. No one else had access. He emphasized that carefully. Several inquiries were made over the years, he added, but we followed her instructions exactly. Inquiries. He wouldn't say from whom. But he did tell me something else. She said, when my granddaughter comes, and she will come, tell her I never stopped believing in her. Not for one day. I could barely breathe. He led me to the vault and left me alone with Box 1247. Inside was a thick folder, a smaller envelope, and a leather portfolio from a law firm I didn't recognize. The first document in the folder made my knees go weak. Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Grace Mercer, executed March 15, 2019. 2 years after the will that had been read to us. I skimmed until I found my name. To my granddaughter, Faith Eleanor Mercer, I bequeath my education trust fund, valued at approximately $1.8 million, and my property at 847 Mountain View Road, Stowe, Vermont, valued at approximately $1 million, nearly $2.8 million. The Vermont house, the one where I spent the happiest years of my childhood, was still mine. Then I found my father's portion. To my son, Richard Mercer, I leave $50,000 and my sincere hope that he will one day understand that family is not a business to be managed, but a garden to be tended. Not 90%, $50,000. The will was signed, witnessed, notarized, completely legal. Then I saw the bank records. Withdrawals from my trust fund, large ones. September 2022, $85,000. September 2023, $82,000. May 2024, $150,000. More than $300,000 gone. The dates lined up perfectly with Derek's tuition and my father's business investments. They had used my inheritance to fund his education and expand Mercer Properties, while telling me my grandmother left me almost nothing, while making me believe I wasn't worth more. At the bottom of the folder was one more handwritten note. I know what you're feeling. Betrayed, furious, but you are not broken. I didn't leave you defenseless. Read everything. Call Margaret. The truth always finds the light. When I walked into that vault, I was a woman who thought she'd been forgotten. When I walked out, I knew I'd been robbed. Margaret Holloway answered on the second ring, as if she'd been expecting me. Her office was discreet and elegant. She had witnessed the 2019 will herself. She had copies of everything. Then she said the word plainly. Your father submitted the 2015 will to probate, the older one. Legally, that's fraud. Fraud. I asked what my options were. We could go to the authorities, criminal charges, investigation, trial, public scandal. Or we could confront him with the evidence and negotiate a full transfer of the trust, the property, and repayment of what was taken, in exchange for not pressing charges. Would he agree? I asked. Margaret's smile was knowing. Richard Mercer would do almost anything to avoid public humiliation. Then she looked at me carefully. Do you want this handled quietly? Or do you want consequences where it hurts most? Part of me wanted handcuffs, headlines, Derek learning the truth about his polished future. But another part of me, the part shaped by my grandmother's steady love, wanted something else. I don't want to destroy him, I said. I want what's mine, and I want him to admit it, in front of the people who matter to him. Margaret nodded. That could be arranged. That's when I remembered the invitation. It had arrived just days earlier. Thick cream cardstock, embossed in gold. A public event. One where my father's reputation would be on full display. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 65th birthday of Richard Mercer. The party was set for 3 weeks later at the country club where my father played golf with judges and CEOs. 80 guests. The kind of event where reputations were polished and alliances reinforced. Victoria even called to remind me to dress appropriately. Don't embarrass us, Faith. I told Margaret about the invitation. She looked almost impressed. You want to give your father a birthday present he'll never forget? I want to give him exactly what he deserves, I said, in front of the only people whose opinions he values. For 3 weeks, we prepared. 3 days before the party, Victoria called again, dripping with fake warmth. Wear something that fits in, she said, and don't stand in the corner like you did at your grandmother's funeral. Smile, mingle, act like part of the family. I had already chosen my dress, simple navy blue. Elegant. I would wear my grandmother's pearl earrings. In my bag, I placed certified copies of everything. The 2019 will, the trust records, the deed, the notarized confirmations. Margaret would attend too, under the perfectly innocent excuse of being an old friend of my grandmother's. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into a family event empty-handed. I had proof. A week before the party, my father summoned me to the house. Family meeting? His message read. He was waiting in his study, Derek and Victoria nearby like silent witnesses. I've heard you've been asking questions at the bank, he said coldly. Whatever you think you found, you're wrong. Mother's estate was settled, legally. When I didn't respond, his tone sharpened. He hinted that if I kept digging, people might question my stability. He even brought up my mother's struggles, suggesting mental illness ran in families. He implied my job could be affected. It was a threat, polished and calculated. I thanked him for his concern and left. What he didn't know was that my phone had recorded every word. That night, I sent the audio to Margaret. Insurance, she replied. If he escalates, we're protected. The next day, Victoria called to smooth things over. We just want to protect the family's reputation, she said sweetly. You're coming Saturday, aren't you? I'll be there, I told her. They thought I'd been intimidated, pacified. The night before the party, doubt crept in. I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at my grandmother's letter. What if I was wrong? What if I humiliated myself in front of 80 powerful people? What if my father was right? I called Margaret close to midnight. She told me something she'd never shared before. 3 days before my grandmother died, she had called her from hospice. She knew the end was near. She said, "My son is going to try to take everything from Faith. Promise me you'll help her when the time comes." And I promised. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Because she said you needed to find your strength first. You needed to be ready. I wasn't crying from fear anymore. I was crying because the weight I'd carried for 5 years was finally lifting. The next morning, I met Margaret at her office. Every document was laid out neatly across the conference table. Certified copies, affidavits, confirmations. Here's the plan, she said. We wait for his speech. He'll give a toast. He'll mention your grandmother. When he finishes, you ask to say a few words. In front of his guests, he won't refuse. He cares too much about appearances. We practiced what I would say and how I would say it. Calm, clear, unshaken. For 30 years, I had been quiet. That night, I was going to speak. Don't raise your voice, Margaret reminded me that afternoon. Don't cry. Don't accuse. Just present the facts. Let the documents speak. At noon, she handed me a slim leather folder. Everything you need, and you won't be alone. The notary is coming as my guest. So are both witnesses to the will. I stared at her. How did you manage that? Your grandmother had real friends, she said. People who knew what Richard was capable of. Eleanor planned for this. She just needed you to be brave. That night, the country club glittered under crystal chandeliers. Champagne flowed. A jazz quartet played softly. 80 guests laughed in tailored suits and designer dresses. At the center stood my father, smiling like a self-made king. I built everything from nothing, I heard him say. No handouts, just hard work. Margaret sat across the room with 2 women, the witnesses. The notary was there too, quiet, observing. Victoria approached me, perfectly composed. You look nice, she said. Your father's about to give his toast. Try to look supportive. He took the microphone, commanding the room. He spoke about success, discipline, legacy. He praised his wife. He praised Derek. Then he mentioned me. My daughter Faith, who's found her own quiet path. Polite applause, sympathetic smiles. He raised his glass. To the legacy of Eleanor Mercer, carried forward by those who truly understood her. I stood. Dad, I said evenly. May I say a few words about Grandma? He couldn't refuse, not with judges and investors watching. I walked to the front, steady despite the silence pressing in. My grandmother was the most important person in my life, I began. She raised me after my mother died. She called me her little star. I paused, then opened my bag. She also believed in keeping careful records. The room shifted. I recently received documents she left for me, including her last will and testament, executed March 15, 2019, legally witnessed and notarized. Silence. According to this will, I was meant to inherit approximately $2.8 million and her property in Vermont, not the $10,000 I received. A gasp rippled through the crowd. My father stepped forward. Faith, this isn't appropriate. The will submitted to probate was dated 2015. I continued calmly. 4 years earlier. Would you like to explain why a newer will was never filed? Whispers filled the room. I held up the bank statements. These records show over $300,000 withdrawn from my trust in the past 3 years. The dates align exactly with Derek's tuition and business investments. Derek stood abruptly. That's not true. It was paid by Dad, I said softly, with my inheritance. My father's composure cracked. Your grandmother wasn't well at the end. She didn't know what she was signing. Richard. Margaret's voice cut through the tension as she rose and walked forward. I was Eleanor's attorney. I witnessed that will. She was fully competent. All eyes shifted. This document is certified, I said. The notary is here. So are the witnesses. Margaret joined me at the front. Eleanor called me 3 days before she died. She addressed the room. She said her son would try to steal Faith's inheritance. She left proof. Victoria looked stunned. Derek had gone pale. There was also a provision, Margaret continued. If Richard violated his duties as executor by submitting an outdated will or misusing funds, his role would be revoked. Faith would become the lawful administrator of the estate. That's not, my father began. It is. Judge Morrison had stood up. His expression was grave. Richard, he said slowly, if this is accurate, you're facing serious legal consequences. You're looking at executive fraud. That's a felony. A wave of whispers swept through the room. I stood there holding the documents that proved everything, watching my father's carefully constructed world unravel in slow motion. I didn't come here to have you arrested, Dad. My voice was calm, but it carried. I came for what belongs to me. Transfer the trust, sign over the deed, repay what you took. We settle this quietly. And if he refuses? Someone asked. Margaret didn't smile. Then we file Monday morning. I had never seen my father look small before. In my mind, he had always been larger than life, powerful, untouchable, impossible to please. But standing there in his tailored suit and polished watch, surrounded by people now seeing him differently, he seemed to shrink. "This is entrapment," he snapped. "You planned this." "I planned nothing," I said evenly. "You delivered the envelope yourself, on my birthday." He went pale. "You told me Grandma died disappointed in me." I let the silence stretch. "She wasn't disappointed. She was afraid of what you might do." "Richard," Victoria whispered urgently, grabbing his arm. "We need to leave. Call our lawyer." Guests were already slipping toward the exits. My father's final weapon was his voice. "You ungrateful, worthless, after everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done," I cut in quietly. "You ignored me for 30 years. You stole my inheritance. You made me believe the one person who loved me most died ashamed of me." I took a breath. "You had 5 years to make this right. Every day you chose not to." His face twisted. "You'll regret this." "No," I said, handing the folder back to Margaret. "These were your choices, not mine." The room had nearly emptied. Only a few remained. The judge, the notary, the witnesses. People who would remember. My father stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe he had never really seen me at all. Later, people asked what it felt like. Victory? Revenge? Honestly, exhaustion. The kind that comes when you've been holding your breath for years and finally let it out. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The fallout came quickly. Within 2 weeks, he was under formal investigation. His attorney reached out with an offer. The remaining $1.5 million transferred immediately. The Vermont house signed over. $350,000 in restitution, plus interest. He would step down as executor. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue criminal charges. Some people said I was too lenient. Maybe. But prison wouldn't give me back the years I spent believing I wasn't loved. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. His business partners withdrew. His reputation collapsed. Victoria filed for divorce. Derek took out loans to finish school. Consequences don't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes they come from exposure. And me? I received a certified check. I received the keys. I received my grandmother's letter, the one I still read every morning reminding me I was loved. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was mine. 6 months later, Derek reached out. "I didn't know," he said when we met. "I never asked where the money came from." "You never asked why I got nothing either," I replied. He didn't argue. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "Just a chance to do better." "You're not him," I told him. "But if you want things to change, prove it over time." He nodded. Maybe he will. I kept my job. People thought I was crazy. "You're a millionaire," my friend said. "Why are you still teaching?" "Because money can't replace purpose. It can't replace the moment a child finally understands something they thought they couldn't." My grandmother didn't leave me money to change who I was. She left it so I'd have choices. So I stayed. I created the Eleanor Mercer Education Fund. Every year, it helps 3 kids go to college. Kids who've been told they won't amount to anything. The Vermont house became my refuge. I sit on the porch where she taught me to read, sometimes speaking to her out loud, and I keep her picture on my desk at home, right next to the scholarship letters we send out every year. Because everything he tried to take from me, she turned into something that lifts someone else up. He built his life on control. She built mine on love. One collapsed, the other still stands. The letter she left me. She believed in me when no one else did, and I carry that belief with me every single day. I don't speak to my father anymore. After the settlement, he sent one final message. Through his lawyer, of course. It said I had destroyed the family and hoped I was satisfied with the damage I'd caused. I never replied. Here's what I know about his life now, mostly through Derek. The business survived, barely. He sold the 5-bedroom house and moved into a condo. The country club membership expired. The gala invitations stopped. The golf weekends disappeared. Turns out, people are cautious about aligning themselves with a man who steals from his own daughter. Victoria remarried less than a year later. A real estate developer from Connecticut. I'm told she's happy. I don't particularly care. And Richard? He's still alive, still working. Still, I imagine, telling himself that he did nothing wrong, that I'm the villain in his version of events. I used to want an apology. I wanted him to admit what he'd done, to acknowledge what he took, not just the money, but my sense of worth. But this past year taught me something important. Some people will never apologize, because to admit they were wrong would mean dismantling the entire story they've built about themselves. And they would rather lose everything than face that. So I stopped waiting. I don't wish him harm. I don't wish him happiness. He's simply no longer part of my story. A character who played his role and exited the stage. The energy I once spent hoping he'd change, I now give to people who deserve it. That's what boundaries really are. Not punishment, not revenge, just clarity. This is where I end. This is where you begin. This is what I accept. This is what I don't. If you've stayed with me this long, let me leave you with a few things I've learned. First, the people who truly love you may protect you in ways you don't even see. My grandmother spent years preparing for the day I would need the truth. She didn't tell me while she was alive, not because she doubted me, but because she knew I wasn't ready yet. She trusted that I would grow into my strength. And she made sure I'd have the tools when I did. If someone believes in you, even when you can't believe in yourself, hold on to that, even if they're gone. Their faith doesn't disappear. Second, silence is not always weakness. For years, I thought my quiet meant I was afraid. But sometimes, silence is preparation. It's gathering evidence, learning patterns, understanding the terrain before stepping forward. When I finally spoke, I wasn't reacting. I was ready. And the man who mistook my silence for submission never saw it coming. Third, and this is the one I wish I had understood sooner. You do not owe forgiveness to someone who has never asked for it. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. They are the decision to stop bleeding for someone who refuses to bandage the wound. My grandmother signed every letter the same way. All my love, always. For 30 years, I wondered if that love had conditions I failed to meet. Now I understand. Her love was never conditional. The only people who made it feel that way were the ones who had something to gain from my doubt. That's my story. A key inside an envelope. A letter locked in a vault. A truth that refused to stay buried. If you've ever been made to feel small, invisible, or less than you are, you're not. And you don't have to remain in that version of the story. There are other endings. This one was mine. I'm Faith Mercer, and I survived my parents.